Hello again. Thank you very much for joining me here on Movie Ninja. It is October. October, in terms of movie watching, is actually probably my favorite month out of the year. For me, growing up, this was late nights with monsters, ghosts, and everything that you can sort of imagine as far this was the most fun stuff to watch. Now, admittedly, for those that are a little bit more familiar with me, they're familiar with the channel, I don't talk a lot too much about horror, because for me it's encapsulated in this one particular month where I get all of my horror viewing in pretty much for the year. Now, with horror movies, there's those classics that you always tend to revisit, but there's always a lot of new things as well. Things that I think horror as a genre, I think it's very introspective. So, we're always learning things about ourselves and what frightens us, and this gets incorporated into new movies and new movie ideas. And I think that's something that helps it to stay fresh, because it's something that's a lot more meditative than perhaps other types of genres. You have your dramas, you have your comedies and things like that. Even with my particular staple of science fiction or fantasy, the same tropes more or less get recycled, time and time again, and to greater or lesser degrees of variation. Sometimes you have something that's completely new that no one has ever seen before, and then sometimes you get the retelling of a story that's been told 100 or 1,000 times, but it's done well. That being said, like I said, I love the month of October. I love the month of October for horror movie watching. It's so concrete. You never have to guess as to exactly what should I be watching? What should I be watching? From October 1st through October 31st. You know that this, it's almost a requirement. So, anywho, so with any October month, you have to revisit. There's a few studios, there's a few eras that you have to tune into every single time. And for me, one of those is Hammer Films. Hammer Films did they made a very good impact on the horror genre. Hammer Films, they also tread the line between horror and prestige film, more often than not. Sometimes with mixed results, but without Hammer, we wouldn't have the Christopher Lee Dracula, the horror of Dracula, and that particular series. We wouldn't have a lot of staples that really led to the inspiration of a lot of filmmakers that came about, later on down the road. So with Hammer, there's the foundations of Hammer usually fell upon the reworkings of the Universal staples. You had Dracula, you had The Curse of Frankenstein, you have The Curse of the Wolfman, The Curse of the Mummy. A lot of curses in Hammer horror. That being said, but eventually they would get led onto The Gorgon or Captain Kronos, which was one of my favorite Hammer films. Now, that being said, there was such a grand library of Hammer that unfortunately not a whole lot of people have a really good grasp of some of their more, I'm not willing to say obscure entries, but there are many, many entries that people just are not aware of. Because, Hammer, especially on this side of the pond, in the United States, they were less, up until recently, a lot of Hammer titles just haven't been well distributed. The demand, because, the syndication rights have always been sort of a messy thing, and so we didn't get to see a lot of really prime Hammer from back in the day. Now, that being said, it was a bit of an extended intro, but I started out this Halloween season with my Halloween viewing with Rasputin the Mad Monk, and I'm vocalizing it very specifically because there is a trailer that is actually on this Blu-ray that is the most exaggerated, hyperbolic type of trailer That like it's sensational. It gets you interested. It gets you like I want to see this. Like essentially, before I let my excitement just run away with me, this was my intro for this Halloween season. Rasputin the Mad Monk. Now, Rasputin, well, what's it about? Movie ninja? Well, but let's get the word from the distributors as they have it. Hammer Films' dual reputation for screen and shock and flamboyant costume adventure meld in this tale of the real-life holy man whose evil charm held the fate of an entire nation in his grip. Rasputin. Rasputin the Mad Monk. Before I get into it, I have to say, in terms of Hammer enjoyable fun, I mean, like, for the sake of, like, historic horror, it's still very, like, for what it is, it's very good, all right? Now, especially, sort of, like, wading into this, particularly on the internet, the major thing that I know a lot of people will ask is like, well, how true is it to the real story? Nutritionally, this is a burger and fries in terms of like historical nutritional value. But I know that this is not a documentary. Bearing that in mind, that makes it all the more enjoyable. So, Rasputin the Mad Monk is a highly summarized version of Rasputin as it was then told in terms of pop history. I mean, like, history that was very, very second-hand or third-hand or even more. This is something that I think will help people, if you see this film, enjoy it, is to understand this is not an academic work. All right? Rasputin the Mad Monk essentially is a very abbreviated story of the rise and fall of a supervillain. Rasputin, as depicted in this film, it's taken at face value of all of the rumored, supposed attributes that this well-known historic personage was known for. So, as if he actually had, he has healing powers, he has telepathy, he has mesmerism. Yes, that's different than telepathy because you have different attributes attached to it. Like, he vaguely put out there that he has above average human strength. This is someone who a lot of people would sort of like, they would watch this and they would say, oh yeah, like there are numerous events that took place in Russia at the turn of the century, and it's all this guy's fault. No. This is a very succinct exaggeration of a historical figure given a very, very brief window in time. And when I say brief, I would say that, like, watching the film, you know that this is only taking place about, like, a few months or so, compared to the actual character who had a much longer installment in the Tsarist court at the time. That being said, I'm going through all of this as to put this out there that I do, like, if you want to watch, like I said, the rise and fall of, like, or the origin story of a fictional historical supervillain, then this, yes, you can have a lot of fun watching this. It's really, it really is something. And like, even if you are invested in the history of the period, things like that, if you watch this, you'll chuckle a few times. But the thing is, it is still fun as it is the way it's presented. Because like I said, they just straight up, they give him superpowers. They give him superpowers and he uses them and wields them with a sort of malicious abandon, and that's the movie in and of itself. Now, I've gone on and on about that just so I can fairly well insulate myself from anyone who says, "How dare you, Movie Ninja? People want the story of Rasputin. They shouldn't see that movie." Once again, I am not advertising Rasputin the Mad Monk as a historical documentary. It is essentially Christopher Lee is playing the Master from Doctor Who. That's what it is. By the way, as far as performances go, I think this is one of the more underrated Hammer Christopher Lee performances, because it actually does allow him to exercise some of his more dramatic muscles along with embodying a character that is known to be much more over-the-top malicious. So there we go. So Rasputin the Mad Monk is a very interesting spin historically on this very well-known quasi-legendary character. But the thing is, like, as you're watching this, it still has a lot of meat on the bone. It's better than you'd think. And if nothing else, it actually does incorporate a lot of the highlights and the hallmarks that even if you only understand Rasputin in a very passing sense. This will actually, what do we know about him? I mean, he was ambitious to the point of being very well over his head at court. He was overbearing, and he was a victim to his own vices. And that's essentially what led him down the path that eventually went down. So, aside from that is my full now this being a recommendation. Now this being a recommendation video, this being a recommendation, I'm not going to subject it to my typical rating of anywhere from 1 through 10. I am actively saying, like, I think all the more, if you are invested and you are knowledgeable of Russian history at the time, this will be entertaining for you in a completely, don't watch it expecting extraordinarily well-documented facts and characters. I am saying specifically, this is a very summarized, but still fun and entertaining Hammer installment. So, that's my endorsement. Take it as you will. And if at any time you had assumed, it was like, okay, Movie Ninja is making this recommendation, he must like the historical merit. I love this because it's fun. And that's really all that you need. Like I said, this version of Rasputin, which, by the way, is the version most of us are actually more or less familiar with in terms of popular media, because this is someone who had superpowers beyond the understanding of mortal men. But for some reason, this is the type of Rasputin that we see in television and movies and video games and comic books. This is the quintessential fictional Rasputin. But like I said, if you watch this, I very much believe you will have a lot of fun. And this is also a Hammer title that not a whole lot of people have seen. So, I mean, you can see what else Christopher Lee was capable of, given the appropriate role. Now, that being said, of course, Christopher Lee was great in everything that he was in. So, I mean, if nothing else, you can also say that he helps to elevate this particular production as well. So, Rasputin the Mad Monk is my first watching for this Halloween viewing season. I recommend, if you have the inclination, especially if you're a Hammer horror fan, I recommend it, and I think you would enjoy it. Thank you very much for joining me here on Movie Ninja, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.